Hello and welcome to Movie Phone. For Blockbuster Shrinks, press 1. Blockbuster Shrinks is playing now.
All right, you're with us again for another podcast.
Woohoo!
Welcome. We've got a good one for you today. This is a fan requested or random person requested. It might not even be a fan. Random person requested movie I put out there on a YouTube short when I was on a road trip. Hey, tell us to do a movie and we'll do it. And so we're doing it. We're getting around to it. Hopefully the time lag from taping to recording isn't and putting out isn't too long, but yeah, it's Roommates, the 1995 movie,
Yeah,
which I didn't
with
see.
Columbo. Actually,
It
it
was
had
so
it had a
hilarious.
handful of people in it that
Yeah, that guy, the son was like, what's his
DB,
name?
I think DB Sweeney, is that his name?
Yeah, that's right.
He's in a
Yeah,
bunch of stuff. And then Julianne Moore, I
Moore.
think is her name,
Yeah,
was
that's
in
right.
it. And
Julianne
then one
Moore.
of the
And then,
doctor friends was
oh
I can't remember his name
yeah.
right now.
Hold on, I'm gonna find it. I've got it. His picture's not in here on the
He's in a lot
IMDb.
of stuff too.
Yeah, he was in a lot of stuff, like a lot of minor roles in lots of different films, right? It's not.
Yeah. Was he in Fargo? Is that what he was in?
I never saw Fargo.
Oh, and I can't remember his
Why?
name right now.
Why is That's hilarious that
And this
his
was nine. Did you
picture
say what year it was? I think it was 1995, right?
1995.
Which
Yeah.
you've got to kind of seek out the really looking at who is in the movie, because there's quite a few different things that have the title Roommates or Roommate or The
Yes, they
Roommate.
do.
There's like a show and another, and one of the
Yeah.
movies was like 94 or something, so it was almost
Well, and there's some
same
sketchy ones
year.
too.
Yeah,
Like like
but this
some
one was not
sketchy
sketchy. This one was
some
actually
sketchy roommate movies, like threesome roommates, and I'm like, ew, I'm not interested in the
so this
threesome
one you want to
roommate
look
movie.
for. Oh, I can't. What's Columbo? The actor that plays Columbo. I can't remember his name right now.
His name is Peter Falk.
Yeah, that's right. Peter Falk,
I
and I
I
think
I
DB
have
Sweeney is what you want
I
to look
have
for.
to say I was distracted the whole movie by his makeup. Like
Yeah,
I
because
just
he's
it's
playing, I
just
think,
wasn't
75. If I remember reading, he's playing 75 to 107-year-old
yeah.
person, and I think he's only 65 or 67 or something
Like
in
they
the
could have
actual
let
movie.
the 60-year-old him stand for at least the opening scene.
No
But like even
way.
that, I was like, dude, I'm like the makeup. I'm sorry, it was just not good. It was very
It is the
distracting.
90s. I think
Very
CG has
distracting.
improved so much that I think they get away with not having to do probably as much makeup nowadays.
Yeah, but they made
But
him old.
so yeah, Falk is always a fun actor to me. I remember watching Columbo as
Oh,
a
he's so,
kid
so good.
with my dad, and then of course Princess and the Bride, right? He's the grandpa in Princess and the Bride
Well,
that
I
lives in
watched
Missouri.
Columbo. Like I loved
Yeah.
Columbo, and I loved Columbo because of him. Like the
Yeah.
way he does the character.
Hmm.
He's just like curious and like put things together, and he seems unassuming. And
Which is
he's
really
just
fun.
yeah, he's
It
so
it's
good. He's such
almost,
a great actor.
yeah, and I remember, yeah, enjoying that show a lot also. This movie, one thing that jumped out to me was it's like there's comedy, right? Kind of
Yeah.
spattered throughout it, but it
Well, it's got
definitely
this.
is a grief movie. Like it's
Oh, dude, it
heavy
hit me. I
into
didn't know. Like,
the
I didn't
grief.
know what we were
Yeah.
getting ourselves into. And at the end, I was like, dude, I was like, seriously, I did not see that coming. I thought we were going to stay on the comedy side. And then all of a sudden, you get punched in the gut. I was like, gosh, dude,
Have you
really?
have you ever seen this movie?
No, no,
I
no. So
haven't.
this
I
was
don't I don't think I have either. I don't remember it.
no, which I can understand. I think 1995, I wouldn't have been looking for a movie like this or aware of a
Yeah,
movie like
that's
this,
true. That's
as
true.
a 19-year-old kid, like,
I'm
this is
sure
a,
like our
it's like,
parents have probably seen it though. Like it, especially
maybe,
I know
yeah.
I'm sure my family, because my it's about a Polish family and my mom is
Hmm.
Polish, and
Oh,
I
really?
would assume, and that was what kind of jumped out to me, like the way that what is the Rocky, that's the grandpa's name, the way that Rocky
Hmm.
is like kind of reminds me of that Polish, like there is some good stuff that made me chuckle
Yeah,
and reminded
I
me
bet
of
for
my
Polish
grandparents.
Americans or Polish immigrants, they probably loved it because I bet it embraced the culture and
I felt
like
like it
the
did, yeah, to some
fussiness,
degree.
you
Yeah.
know,
Just kind
of
of
that
his staunchness. I don't know if that's the right word to describe it, but he's very
rigid.
but there's a heart there, right? It's really an
Oh gosh,
interesting
yeah.
dichotomy that I feel like I saw growing up, where there's like this rigid staunchness, but underneath is this caring heart that's not gonna just, and that's where we start, right? He's not gonna let this boy just go wherever. He's like,
Yeah.
this is my
So that
grandson, I'm
was
gonna take care of him.
so before I even knew how hard hitting the movie was going to be, it instantly brought a great deal of tenderness. I didn't lose my
Hmm.
parents at a young age or anything like the main character does in this movie, but like my grandfather, and my grandfather wasn't quite that edgy. He was just more quiet.
Yeah.
But like the scene somewhere towards the middle end or whatever, where there's some where the wife, what's her name? Let me say her name, the character name correctly.
The wife's played
Beth.
by Julianne Moore. Yeah, Beth.
Yeah, so Beth, like when Rocky comes to live with them, at some point, the daughter, oh yeah, I think the granddaughter goes in and says like, "I love you," and he's like, "Oh, you're not so bad either." And then he says to
Yeah.
Beth, "Oh, you're not so bad either." And like,
It holds her hand. Yeah.
yeah, I don't think, and I was trying to think, I don't think I ever heard my grandpa say, I could be wrong.
Yeah.
I knew
No.
he loved me. I knew he loved me,
Hmm.
but I don't know if I ever heard him say I love you. Like
Well,
I'm sure I did.
I don't think Rocky says it the whole movie,
He
right?
doesn't.
Yeah, even
He
at the
doesn't.
end
And I don't think he even said it at the
when
end.
DB
No.
Sweeney, or the grandson, I can't remember what his character name is. Even when he says it finally, he's like, "I love
Michael.
you, Michael." That's right.
Yeah, he says it. Yeah.
And like DB or Rocky doesn't say it the whole
I don't
time.
think
The
so.
Falk
No, it just kind
character.
of expires, you know.
Yeah,
I can't remember what his last line is. I don't
it's
remember what
kind
he
of that
says.
mentality of, I don't need to say it. I'll show you.
Yeah, you
Right.
know
I'll
it.
show you
Like we're
by
family. Like
caring.
yeah,
Hmm.
like I didn't let you go to some church home or some nun home or something like that. You
But
know, he's
it's
like,
great.
staying with
Like
me. And he's like,
you
that's
you
it.
talk about like grief to the extreme. So he loses his wife, like Rocky's wife is gone, and then he loses his son and daughter-in-law, which are Michael's parents, and then Michael loses his wife, right? I mean, just and I noticed, I was
Brutal.
reading, one of the descriptions said it's based on a true story or something. I don't know
I
how
wondered.
loosely that is.
I didn't dig in, but I wondered. I'm like, if there's somebody's life story had to be this rough, like,
Yeah, and I don't know if it's like just based on the true story of, he was, the Rocky character is a real person who was like the oldest baker in Pittsburgh or something. I don't know
oh,
if
I bet
that's the
something like
true
that.
part,
Yeah, yeah,
and
that's
the
interesting.
other stuff isn't.
I wonder if there was an homage there, right? Because there's like this scene where he's like on TV or wonder. I wonder if that was a
Yeah.
mockery of something that
I
actually
know. I
happened, where they
wonder if
had
you
this
could
guy.
find, I'm sure, because remember growing up,
If
like,
you get into a long monologue, I can look.
well, remember growing up, I don't know if they still do this because I don't have like TV anymore. I just have streaming services. But I remember growing up, I think it was on like Good Morning America or one of those type shows. They always had, and they showed it in the movie.
Yeah.
They always had the part where they talk about people who are over 100 and tell them happy birthday on their birthday. And so I wondered, like, as I was watching this, I was like, if this is based on a true person, I wonder if he was ever like recognized in one of those morning shows, because he lived to be 107 years old, which
Oh, that's
is
interesting.
just
Well, here
amazing.
let's look. It looks like uh so in one of the reviews it says, so it's this review. I assume I assume it's honest. It says um the true story of a Polish baker in Pittsburgh who raised his orphaned grandson at the age of 70 and put him through medical school. Sounds like a formula for a sentimental and cliche. However, the movie transcends that and becomes a moving story of strength and family where many wonderful touches of humor. So it says the true story, but that's just
Yeah.
that line. Let me see if there's some other. Um, so one of the things, Michael, so one of the person that asked us to do it, and I meant to go on, maybe I can in my app here in a second, or maybe you can. They asked us to keep some things in mind as we talked about the movie. And
Well,
they
one,
said,
go ahead.
so they said, because I say, what movie would you want us to do, and is there themes that you'd want us to talk about? And so this individual said, how do you keep the memory of of a loved one alive? How to keep the memory of a loved one alive is something that they wanted us to touch on, and the importance of family in the modern world. Or
Well,
some
I think
themes that they
like
wanted
when
us
I
to talk
think
about.
about keeping the memory of a loved one alive, my mind goes straight to um what's the name of the Pixar movie? Is it Coco? Can't
Of
think of
the
what
Latina
it's
family, the
called.
Mexican Latina family.
Yeah, where it's
Yeah,
like
it's
Day of
Coco.
the
That's
Dead. So
Coco.
Coco. I
Hmm.
think of that.
Yeah.
Like I think that's always an awesome way is to celebrate, celebrate them by keeping memories of them. So as I remember him posting that, and I remember thinking, or she, I don't know if it was a man or a woman, because the username was I think a long one. But
Hmm.
one thing that, or a couple of things I think about. So in our culture or in our world, we have this inclination or this idea that grief is a process and it there's stages, and that comes from
Hmm.
Kubler-Ross, right? She did
Hmm.
or Kubler-Ross did this, um, did research on I think it was back in the 60s, right, on people who are terminally ill and kind of the emotional process or emotional stages that she identified them going through as they were um, being presented with death. And this research was taken and kind of just stamped as the grief process, the 5 stages
Hmm.
to grief.
Right.
And
Hmm.
what we really have, and this just took off, right? So everyone thinks there's these stages to grief, but really there's not stages to grief. And we can have any emotions at any time, and they can come
Right.
up at any time in our life. And
Yeah.
so one thing that probably one of the best authors and therapists that I've found on this topic is Alan Wolfett, and
Okay.
he has the series Understanding Your Grief. I really appreciate, he talks about, instead of thinking about trying to go through a process and trying to, we have these thoughts of, it'll get better, or you need to move on, you need to get rid of things, you need to heal. He talks about embracing the grief and allowing it to
Mm,
happen. And he
yeah.
talks to the therapist, and he in the therapist point of view, he's like, hey, as a therapist, you want to be a companion with them in their grief, not they need to get
Tall
over or
order,
heal
dude.
from their grief.
That's a
It
tall order
is.
right there.
And I think that's how we keep the memory alive to some degree, is we help our minds understand this is not a process that we want to move through and necessarily, like, quote unquote, get over, but we want to
Something
allow
to
the emotion,
it's something to
embrace the
integrate, don't you
emotion.
think so?
Yes,
I think that's how
integration is a
I've dealt.
great way to view
I
it.
think that's how I dealt with my mom's. I definitely
Hmm.
noticed that those outline stages were different experiences I had at different times. And for
Yes.
some people, I suppose you could go through that order. You know what I mean? Particularly, I could imagine, especially with a shocking death or an unexpected death, that denial stage, you know, would hit you first. But it could pop up at different times, I think, for sure, like
But
you
even if
kind of
you do
mentioned.
go through those stages, that doesn't mean you're done. Like,
No,
they can come
absolutely.
back whenever, and you
Absolutely
can have
true.
multiple stages at once. You can.
Yeah, and I think in the context of that idea of integration, because I was really surprised when my mom died. I think it's been 3 years ago now. And it was very expected. She had had a long battle with cancer, and I was hoping for her kind of deliverance. She was in not a great situation. It was during COVID, and or the end was during COVID, which made it really awful because I wasn't able to see her. and I remember afterwards, and my mom and I were close, but not like, they weren't, I mean, we were like, yeah, we weren't, I mean, I wouldn't say we were close, but we talked, and I loved her, and she was a gracious, good woman. But like, so in all of that, being a therapist, not feeling super tight with my mom, uh, expecting her death because she was, really in this long battle with cancer. I remember, like, after a month or so, like, I just had this dark cloud of gray that I could not get rid of, man. And it was like, okay, I'm like, okay, my mom has died. and I couldn't fully, and I think that one of the reasons why it was really hard is like I couldn't understand it. Like I didn't understand, based on a relationship, based on everything, like I couldn't understand like why I felt so sad, in the context of all of the resources I had, all of the healthy thinking I had. And it just hung over me for a while, and so it's, yeah, I think that idea of integration, and I think one of the things that's cool about this movie, that can help us is like how can you not tell a story about Rocky? And I think stories is one of the things that's really um is really important. Now I had my own process of what I did to kind of move past that gray. Um and
I
and
think I think your example is a great example of
Yeah,
what typically happens is when we experience, grief or experience that emotion.
that loss,
I
yeah.
feel like most people that I work with, and even I can think of myself in my experience, we have this like inclination or this thought that it should happen a certain way,
Yeah,
or
which I didn't
why
necessarily have per
why
se, but
was yeah. And well, what you were saying was this is confusing. Like, why am I feeling
yeah,
this?
yeah, that's fair.
and
Yeah,
and so your mind's like trying to tell you, trying for some reason, like our minds are trying to tell us this, this is not right, or this should move on, I should do, whatever our mind's trying to do. And that's one thing that I think is really important with grief, is understanding that it can come in any way or any
yeah,
form, and it's
and
not
that's
wrong or weird or anything
yeah,
like that, but to
and
just
that's
embrace it and allow that and find
and that
someone that can be safe with you in it.
And that's why I bring up that word integration, right? Because I think like I was able to make sense of integrate and kind of finally start to understand what was going on for me. And then this idea of, and I say this all the time with grief and loss clients, like different things are just going to come up at different times. And the most important thing is to just go with that in that moment and give space or expression or dialogue, which is what I think stories can do, right? Because like what I do now, like at different times when my mom comes up, like somewhat recently we had got a second dog, and my mom loved animals, and actually right after she died we got our Nigel. Yeah, so that is true. It's been 3 years because Nigel's about to be 3. um that Christmas after she passed away we got a puppy, and I remember during that period, like every day for like 2 months I was like, oh, I gotta call my mom and tell her about the puppy. And then I was like, oh, I can't call my mom. And when we got a second dog, same thing came up. Like I wanted to like it was one of the things that mom and I would talk about, because I love animals too. And I kept wanting to tell her about the dog or tell her about stories that were going on with the dog or how we were integrating this dog into our family. And so there were quite a couple different times during that period where that kept coming up, that I would talk about that with not just Nicola, my wife, but I mentioned it to a couple different friends. Like, oh yeah, we got this dog. And I just said it to this, like some of my close friends. I keep wanting to call my mom and tell her. And so then like I talked about my mom. So I think that's like the place that stories can have, where when the thought comes up of the person, whether that's a sad memory because of a traumatic thing that you remember, or whether that's a really happy memory because of fun that you had around a holiday. And I think that's happened. I think at Christmas time, or I think almost every time at Christmas or Thanksgiving, I'll make a point to talk about our traditions, what I remember of my traditions. Like I'll talk to my kids about that. Like, part of the reason why we do this is because we did this, when I was a kid, and I loved this, and it was always made me happy, or it's one of the things I loved about my childhood. And so I think those kinds of things are the way that you integrate, is that you speak forth that meaning, or even possibly that hurt,
Yeah,
as you're going through life.
and I think that's the key, right? Is throughout these moments, being able to share them and allow them to happen. And so you can do that through writing, you can do that through talking to someone, you can do that through storytelling, but you also want to honor that emotion and allow sharing of
Absolutely.
that emotion.
The
And
honest emotion too, like the real story, like not just the one that puts them in a good light, which I'm not saying you should throw somebody under the bus, but like if someone was hard, like say it, like, yeah, this is a really hard aspect of my relationship with your grandpa, and we worked it out, or I let it go, or we never worked it out, and it bothers me that we never worked it out. Like, I think that's a really important thing to say with those memories, because it's true, and then that allows other your kids or whatever to be like, oh, that, okay, that makes sense that that bothered you, or maybe that opens understanding. I mean, I think I definitely opened up understanding. There were a couple different times where I don't know if my parents said it deliberately or I overheard conversations, but I remember as a kid, maybe this is why I'm a therapist, like hearing my parents talk about a story, and I was like, oh, that's why my mom acts the way that she does, because how her mom did this, and that's why she does this with me. I don't remember, if I can't think of one right off of what, but I remember that happening a couple of different times and being like, oh, I get it. You know what I mean? Or maybe they
Yeah.
shared, and this is why this is important to me, or this is why I do that. And that's like really important. Like, that becomes a part of like your culture, that becomes a part of
Yeah.
like your identity or whatever. What's another way? Are there other ways, Michael, that you and
Well,
your family have
I think
like
another
retained remembrance or
I think another key point here is that you want to be able to share with others that, hey, I don't need like advice. I don't need you to
yeah,
help
that's
me
a hard
understand
one.
how to fix this. I
Such
just
a hard
need
one.
someone who can listen and can
That's
hear
the
and
that's the
can be
sympathy
with me in
versus
it.
that's the sympathy versus empathy thing. That's the
Yeah.
biggest mistake people make
Well, it
with
happens
their
in marriage all the
friends.
time, right? One of them usually
Yes,
wants
but
to fix
particularly
because
with
they care so much. They're in
right.
pain that their
Yeah,
spouse
I
is
don't
in
want
pain. They want to
yeah,
fix it, but the spouse doesn't
right.
need
So
them
then
to
they
fix
throw
it.
sympathy. Yeah, then they'll throw sympathy.
Yeah.
You want me to make you a sandwich? Do you want me to like help you out with this?
Yeah.
It's like, no, no, I need to feel this. And I just need you to be here with me and relate to
Hmm.
me as I'm feeling this. I don't need you to fix it. I don't need you to give me an answer. I don't need you to, you can
And
give an answer.
sometimes,
You can give an answer if somebody asks for it. Like,
sure.
they're like, I'm with this and I'm stuck. And that's when those wisdom can come through in that way. But otherwise, you just have to be there. You just have to mourn with those that mourn, you know?
And I think you can you can find those that maybe naturally do that, or you can try to
Mm-hmm.
tell people this is what I need, or you can have them read
Yes.
a book on understanding grief that will help them to understand how they can respond to you. But you really need to be able to find avenues where you can express that grief when it comes, and don't push it off. You want to express it in the moment, whether that be in
Mm-hmm.
writing or sharing with someone else. And just remember, it's not a process. Like, there is not a point in which you should be like, okay, it's been 6 months, I should be over this, or it's been a year, I should get rid of these things. Whatever works for you is what matters. And so if
Yeah.
you like having things around that remind you, keep those things. You don't have to get like, there's no process or one thing that's going to work for everyone when it comes
Yeah.
to grief beyond
Yeah.
honoring those
That's
emotions.
Yeah. So one of the things of how of keeping memories alive, that's a big one for our family is we have taken like, yeah, I've definitely kept a lot of things,
Mm-hmm.
and particularly I've kept things that were important to them. So like for my mom had this thing about metal tins, dude. She had metal
Uh-huh.
tins everywhere. I don't know. I think when I was a kid, when I was around ninth grade, I remember counting all the ones in the house, and I think we had over 90.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I know she had many of them still when she
Yeah. My
passed.
mom has a
So
lot too.
have metal tins, like, like they had Christmas cookies in metal
Yep.
tins, and there was
Exactly.
tea in metal tins, and so there's a bunch of metal tins around my house. My mom also in her later years, which wasn't a thing when I was still growing up, but it became a thing, I guess, where she started getting teapots. And so I picked a teapot for every one of my daughters and one for my wife. And so
Hmm.
we have like some of the teapots, and some of the mugs and things related to that. And then like I remember my grandparents had heirlooms, which weren't like they weren't like worth anything, but they were just things from old. And I remember in their house, like which I almost wanted to keep. My grandfather had like an old spindle,
Hmm.
like for spinning wool. And it was in their house. Like I think he just thought it was cool, but it was like
Yeah.
one of his family members. I don't remember whose it was, or unfortunately, but he had it in the house. And like when my grandfather finally died, I like looked at my wife, and she's like, dude, no. But but like they had things. And so like there's these like fireplace things that I have around my fireplace that I took that were like old, like they're like these old shovel things for the fireplace. And I have like these old like jugs, like like old jugs, like some old milk jugs. And then my grandfather made stuff. So like I have a bunch of furniture and clocks that my
Yeah, that's
grandfather, that
cool.
like he was a police officer, but he would make, that was like his hobby. And so we have a bunch of furniture around the house that he made. um so like I've things like that. And so I
That's
think
the
that's one of the
key.
ways that
You
I
want
keep
to
the memories.
find,
And we have old
yeah,
pictures. We have old pictures everywhere in the house of
mhm.
old family members.
Yeah, you want to find what works for you, right? And what works
Right.
for your lifestyle. That, I can think of things over the years that like my mom has given me, or things that were my dad's and my mom's asked me about. And I'm like, no, like that, I just know I won't be able to keep, just with the way our lifestyle is. But then I do
Right.
have things from my dad that, I know I will, and I still have it, after, 20, I don't know, 22 years of him passing away. I still have those things because that works for me. And so find things that are meaningful, and either display them or revisit them whenever you want. Like it's fine.
hmm
There's not,
So
and so
so back
often
to
in
the
media we see that, right? So
yeah.
often in media we see this idea. I was just watching an episode of the Goldbergs in season 10, and the dad has passed away, and they're like, oh, you need to get rid of his stuff out of the closet. She had kept a small closet or something like that. If I remember right, they were saying, oh, you need to, but it's okay. Like it doesn't, like, there, you don't have to get rid
Unless
of
it
stuff.
turns into hoarderness. If you that's with the hoarders, there's always this idea of not being able to let go. So don't become a hoarder, but
Don't.
non-hoarderish. Yeah. So I have a question for you. So from the movie, what family dynamic or what aspect of the movie did you connect with, um or was meaningful for you?
Oh, I don't know. Thought I thought there was times that were funny, and I liked that with the movie, because I feel like with Rocky, um I feel like I feel like that there was a lot of that, where there was real kind of like push for, I want it done my way. Um but then there was also levity at times. So like growing up, that's what I feel like I remember and relate to in this movie, in Rocky being very kind of direct, and like, you need to do it, like, he kind of stubborn, right? He wants it done his way, and then if you don't do it his way, it's almost like he takes offense to it a little bit. But he still is
Mm-hmm.
there. He's still there. He still loves, he needs a little bit of pushing from the wife at one point to get
A
over his
little,
stubbornness, right?
a little bit of
But he's still there. He still loves, and I feel like that's what, really I remember from my childhood, is this kind of expectation of, do it my way, and being kind of stubborn, and very, the way he acts, like he's just like in people's faces. If he, like, what does he do at one point? Doesn't he like beat someone up, or pushes them or something? I can't remember. Early in the
Oh,
movie he does
there was
something.
the baseball scene where he headbutted the guy that took the baseball from his
Yeah,
grandson.
that's right. That's right. Like, that's what I remember. But then he's also kind and loving. So that's kind of what I took away from the movie, that seemed similar to what I remember growing up with. How about you?
Mhm. There was one of the lines I really loved. I don't know if this is something that resonated with me, but that's a harder one. I think the thing that really resonated with me before I share one or two of the lines that really struck me was yeah, that the relationship or what I connected with, though my grandfather wasn't quite as prideful and snarky, he was definitely that old school. Like he wasn't gonna tell you he loved you. Though I was the grandson, so he definitely probably he was affectionate with me because I would jump on his lap, and and I think I was all over the place. And I think there was something about that he really liked. And I think he sparked curiosity and he fed that. Like, I mean, my whole golf thing, golf defined my adolescent life into college, and it's a huge impact on decisions I made in my life. And he introduced that to me. Like he had these golf clubs in the basement. Like he had wooden golf clubs in the basement that I thought were really cool. And his golf bag always sat right by the back door. And we would go visit, and it was always there. And he had these cool, he had the old school like shoes. I don't know what you call them, where they have like the stitched in design. Nobody like wears them anymore,
Like
but like
wingtips.
golf, yeah, like wingtips, with like really
Hmm.
patterned design with like
Yeah.
the saddle wingtip color or whatever. And I always thought those are freaking cool. I'm like, I don't know what it is about those shoes, but they're cool. And when I started golfing, all through my like, even now, if I were to start to golf now, I would not be wearing modern sneaker shoes. I would be wearing classic saddle shoes from like, what the golfers were wearing in the, the
Uh-huh.
late 50s or whatever it was. And so there was just something really cool and like mysterious and magical. Like everything about my grandfather was like mysterious and magical and like cool. He did all of these things that my parents didn't do that I just was like fascinated by. And he didn't make any sense to me because my parents were like 60s, love child kind of kids, like,
Uh-huh.
like drug use and kind of like, that whole thing. And like he wasn't like they weren't like none of their parents were. They were like, like World War II parents, my grandparents were. And so, and I spent a lot of time around my mom's parents. I didn't spend any time around my dad's parents really. And so my grandparents were just so mysterious because like everything about them and their values. And it's probably why I ended up, I'm a more conservative person. I'm a religious person. I ended up more like my grandparents in my value sets and how I live my life than my parents, because for me, my family life was like chaotic and crazy. And my grandparents, both of them were stable and like were married for like 70 years. And I love that. You know what I mean? Like I love that.
Yeah.
And like, and I'm on the path to that, I'm very like, old school in that. I loved it. I loved all the security. I loved all the everything about that vibe that I enjoyed, being in my grandparents' home. And so I think that aspect I definitely felt the echo of in this movie, and that tenderness, the pancakes and the cookies,
Hmm.
and even how he was, like the scene where right after the death of his mother, where they go to like a soda shop or whatever. I think he gets tea and then he gets like, chocolate milk or whatever.
Yeah,
Like
I'm
I
talking
can't tell you how
about
many
one.
times I did that. I can't tell you how many times I did that with my grandfather. You know what I mean? Like where we went like
Yeah.
to this old timey like soda shop like in Limbrook, like where he grew up. And he took me a couple times and we went sat on these stools and went in there, and he knew the guy in there because he had been like a beat cop, and sat
Yeah.
down and like we didn't talk. That was the thing, is like I wanted to like talk, or we just kind of sit there. And I like I was always kind of uncomfortable around him because he was just so quiet, But like he'd answer my questions, or he would tell these stories occasionally, but he wasn't like a talkative guy at all.
Yeah,
And so
that's
there was just
cool.
all this there's just all this mystery and stuff. So I think I really connected with that a lot from
Yeah,
the
that's
show.
cool. Yeah, I don't my grandfather, the one that I would have known probably the best, my other grandfather I only met once in my life, but my grandfather that I would have known best, he passed away when I was like 6 or 7. So I didn't
Is that your
really
mom? The one that you
yeah.
knew more? Was that your
Yeah,
mom's
my mom's
dad?
side. So I didn't really get to ever know him. I didn't really have grandparent perspective like experiences. And so I relate best to the movie with just, because Rocky really takes the parental role, right? And so relating to kind
Right.
of just experiences with my parents. But something that I thought a part that I really liked in the beginning, and it's mentioned later in the movie, in the beginning, after Michael's parents pass away, his grandpa takes him, right? And you can tell that Michael's really struggling with this, and they show the scene where they go to sleep at night and the grandpa just has
Oh
this
yeah.
this crazy
Snore.
snore, right?
Exactly like my grandfather.
And I
Roared
loved,
through the house. My grandfather's
yeah,
snore. Roared through the house.
and I love that scene because it shows, Michael finding peace and comfort, something about that
Yes.
created peace and comfort for him, which he was able to sleep. And it's mentioned later in the movie where he
Yeah.
hasn't been sleeping well for like 4 years because he's been off at med school. And then he brings his grandfather with him, um, to
Such a
live with
cool
him,
scene.
and he starts snoring and
Mhm.
he just is able to fall back to sleep. Like it's
So
such a
great.
cool thing. and
It was
and
a
it's
really great
things
scene.
like that that
The
I think
communists.
become endearing. Yeah, that become endearing, and things that we need to remember and kind of like little things like that just take note of, especially as we're going on and trying to remember the things we love, because that's just a funny, quirky thing, right? But it's so meaningful to Michael, where for
What
me, for
is
the communist guys, right, they probably just were annoyed by it.
so
You
hilarious?
saw the one scene where they're
Yeah,
like,
like
oh
with
my
the
goodness.
event. Tell me what do you think, because maybe extended family isn't honored as much in our society. I definitely had a vibe that my grandparents honored their extended family more than I felt like my parents honored their parents. What do you think about that role or the importance of extended family in the modern world? Like we see, and you're commenting on how important it was for Michael, right? So here you have this environment where it's college, and he brings
Yeah.
his grandfather. And so it's like totally doesn't fit, right? But there's this whole good thing that happens. I mean, really, Michael moving forward to the next step is really kind of pushed by like, what are you doing by not asking this girl to go to Pittsburgh with you? You know what I mean? Thing. So what do you think about what the role of extended family? Do you have any like take on that
I
or
I think
anything?
it's a really cool homage to family is family, right? Whether it's extended or
Hmm.
not. And I love how in a moment of desperate need, the grandfather takes on the grandson. No one else is really able to do it, right? And they're like, we're going to put him in a home. And the grandfather's like, no, I'm going to take him on. And then I love how later in the movie, when the grandfather is in a moment of need because he's losing his house and he's like, I can't leave this house. I've spent 40 years in this house, right? He said,
Yeah, my son
my
was born
dad,
here.
yeah,
Yeah,
my
you're done. Yeah.
son, my wife, he has all these memories. And I think it's such a cool thing, that moment where Michael gets to take him, right? It's almost like,
Yeah.
hey, you did for me what I couldn't do. I'm doing now for you what you can do. And it doesn't I don't think it matters if it's a grandfather or not.
Sure.
I think family is, I think there's a lot more to family beyond just blood. And I think that that's something that is interesting when it comes to extended family or to friendships,
So what do you sorry, go ahead. Just finish your thought. I'm
is
sorry.
that there's a notion here at times that or there's kind of the sentiment I find oftentimes where if it's not a blood relationship, right, then
Yeah.
it's not quite the same. But I think for me, just looking at, family is family, and we can support and love each other and be kind to each other regardless of those bloodlines. But I love that, in this example, this is a little bit not exactly like in law. They are blood related, but he's able to do for his grandson, and then his grandson's able to do for him.
What do you think about what the family gained from Grandpa, right? Because this is ultimately a major plot line of the show of how Rocky gave something to Michael. What do you think about that? Like, what do you think we gain from that? Like, what is it that we gain, which is maybe something that's missing in our modern society from being more attached to our extended family? What do you think that it was? I mean, you see Rocky being there for Michael, which, really, essentially redeems him at the end. What do you
I
think
mean,
that
he gains
was?
a
Like, what?
parent. I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
how it would play out if his parents didn't die, right? I don't know
Yeah,
what
that's a good
that
point.
relationship, or if there even would
That's a
have
big
really
point.
been a relationship, but he gains a parent. And I think that that's what stuck out most for me in the movie, is that you don't have to birth someone to be a good parent, or like we've talked
Hmm.
about many times in our past episodes, that mentor role. And I feel like, Rocky is a great example of that, because not only does he do that for Michael, but then later in the movie, when Michael has kids, he does that for the kids. He's getting old,
Yeah,
and so maybe he doesn't do it as well, because
very
he's
well.
got to be what,
Yeah,
like 100
like
at
a
that
hundred or
point,
whatever it was. Yeah, I think that that's
but
what
he
it is. I
still
think
does it. He still parents.
I think one of the things. So, and with that parenting, um, it seems like there's a handing down of tradition. I think that
Hmm.
that or that culture, right? This isn't that one of the lines towards the end when Rocky is taking care of the kids, is, I don't know, we don't know what the time frame is or whatever, not, I suppose not long,
Sure.
where Michael's drinking and he's, falling apart with his grief. And he's kind of, he's holding things down. But then, like, at the end, at the graveyard, they go to see the mother, and he talks about how he goes there often. And so it seems like there's this stability or strength that's handed down, and I think that there's something there. I think that there is something there where if we just kind of put our parents away, or if we don't have, familial connection. I mean, it's definitely something that I want to try to preserve as I have kids. That was a little bit different because my parents were so
Well, and I
um
think,
separate from their grandparents, and I think that
mhm,
that was one of the things that I gained, that I see the strength that Michael at the end is like, I'm able to stand on my own 2 feet now. You helped me get through all of the grief and loss, and I don't know what's the right term, like I want to say like endurance, or your staying by me, is something that I've
yeah,
inherited, and I'm
I,
going to be able to do that for my kids and our family or whatever.
yeah, I feel like the end scene is really a great, or I don't remember if that's the end scene, but that scene where they're in the graveyard after his wife has died.
Yeah, it's like the second lesson. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really great scene of health, like a healthy acknowledgement of the grieving that we all
Mm-hmm.
go through when we lose someone or lose something that had great meaning in our life. And I feel like it's a great example of Michael realizing and seeing that his father or grandfather, however he views him, who was his primary caretaker, right? This person who really didn't show that side of himself, at least throughout the movie. You really didn't see much of that beyond when he had to leave his home and he mentions this, I've been here for 40 years.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
great example, or it's a great scene, because the grandpa basically teaches him that the grieving process isn't a process. It's something that's always going to be there. Like, you care about someone, you're not just going to move
Forever.
on from that, right?
Right. Right.
And he
You
does
relate
that
to
by
those.
saying, he does that by showing them, hey, or showing Michael, hey, I come here often. I bring your kids here. And he's saying,
Hmm. I
this is
talk to them
part
all the
of
time.
how
They don't talk
I
back very
grieve.
much, but
Yeah.
yeah,
And
they
then he
talk.
says the funny
Yeah.
part about go talk to the living, right? Which is great. But I love
Yeah.
that scene because for me, he's passing down knowledge of how to grieve, because obviously
Yeah.
Michael is struggling with the grieving
Yeah,
process.
that's a great point. Yeah, that's a really insightful, great point. And that's such a great point too, of this idea of you don't have to get past it, which I think like you identified and like came out, is that idea of integration,
Yeah.
and making peace with the loss, and figuring
Hmm.
out how to live with it, versus it's something you should get over.
Yeah.
Because I think particularly when you have a an unanticipated loss, like of a child
Yep.
or a spouse in midlife or whatever, you
Yeah,
it's
you can
it's
have
not
trauma
like,
and grief, right? You can
yeah,
have all
because
types of
it's
things
like
that
that
come
it
up.
didn't follow the life,
Yeah.
projection of what is the life cycle. It all of a sudden became traumatic, especially if it happens in a really traumatic way. And it's like, yeah, like
Yeah.
there's no okayness. Like, you can't be okay with it because what happened wasn't okay.
Yep.
So
And
like,
that's
how
where
can you be
definitely
okay
anger
with
can
it?
come out, right? Anger
Yeah.
and
Yeah, absolutely.
frustration. Yeah.
Absolutely. It wasn't okay. It shouldn't have happened. This person shouldn't have been there, or this person shouldn't have been harmed in this way
Yep.
that led to this traumatic loss. That's not okay. Yes. Right. It's
Yep.
not.
And
And so
it's,
then it's about,
even when
living
you
with it, making
expect it,
peace with it.
right? It's just, and that's, I
Yeah.
think, one thing that's so
No.
hard about the grief process is it's so unique and individual to each person. But there's really, I mean, even it's so funny. You look at the 5 stages of grief from Kubler-Ross, and there's these different emotions that you're supposed to go through, but there's way more than 5 emotions that you can experience in the
Yeah.
grief process. There's so many
Yeah. I mean, it's a good
variables.
benchmark. I don't think I felt any anger with my mom's loss at all. That's not
Hmm.
true. That is not true. I just remembered, actually, the day out, it was the next day, and I wanted to slay her old husband. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
frustrated
was,
with.
no, rage. It
Yeah,
was rage. It was seething rage. And
yeah. I remember you talking to me about
the
that.
only thing that kept me from acting on my seething rage is I looked at my brother and he was in a different place. And
Yeah,
he kind of had this look like, well, yeah, what did we expect, with her
yeah,
husband, unfortunately. And so, and then I was just like, and then I think in an instant, I think it was like, what's your rage going to do? Like, I
yeah.
mean, you could rip somebody to shreds. You could act on, what's that going to do? Which is,
Ultimately, make you feel even more
yeah, I would have felt
emotion
like a
later,
jerk.
right? Yeah,
Yeah, I would have felt like an
shame, guilt would have
absolute,
presented.
yeah,
Yeah,
total jerk if I would have lit him up for whatever, Yeah, it's interesting, man. Um, yeah, it's and a complex movie. Did you expect, or did you know? Did you expect? I mean, did you expect the wife death?
oh no, I
Did that
didn't.
hit you? That was a punch to the
I
gut,
didn't. I
dude.
was like, dude, this is like this movie's all about the grief and
Loss.
loss. Like they want to hone that in.
Yeah.
I was a little shocked. I was like, haven't we had enough already? But no,
Yeah.
they wanted to
No,
really make
let's go ahead and
sure.
pile it on some more. We'll just traipse out the little kids right in front of you and then
It was
walk them
still a
home.
good, like I enjoyed it. It was a good movie.
Yeah.
I loved the
I
humor throughout, and I love kind of the arc that happens really with Michael, right? He goes through this
mm-hmm.
this really this character arc that I thought was really good. And I love the end, right? Where he's able to express I love you verbally when
Mm-hmm.
no one
So
has. So
cool.
it's like such a good growth type
It is,
movie
right?
that is emotional, but also has its fun moments.
I loved there were two lines that I loved. I loved oh, what reason and family have nothing to do with one another, which was at
Yeah.
the beginning when he's like,
Hmm.
you have to have reason. I loved that line. And I loved marriages don't need a third wheel, but families do, which is what
Yeah.
Beth says to grandpa. I love that. It's like she's like, yeah, you're right. It's not good for a marriage, but this is
Which
more
is
than a marriage. This
such an
is
integral
a
role to
family.
bring her in, right? Because she
Oh, that's
plays
such
the
a great.
binder as the social worker. She's able
Yeah,
to help
yeah,
heal a little bit so they can continue
she
down their
did.
path. Without her, I don't
Hmm.
think there was that one point where they wouldn't have continued, or at least not in that
Well,
time
yeah,
frame. It
she
might have been
brings
years
yeah,
later,
well,
possibly, but
yeah, well, she brings grandpa back, right?
yep.
Like, I mean, like
Hmm.
he tries to, and they get the hose scene or whatever, and then she's like, "Come on, dude, like,
Yep.
we actually well." And the cool thing wasn't even like we're doing you a favor. It was also like we need you, because like those grandkids did. I mean, I'm sitting here like we're talking about this movie. I'm talking about my parents. Like I can't even begin to think about how screwed up my life would be if I wouldn't have had the example and mainstay of my grandparents, man.
Yeah.
Like my grandfather and my grandmother, particularly my grandfather, was just this unbelievably important figure in my life. I
We
can't
we need something. And
the gravity of it.
it goes back to Karate Kid, right? And talking about Miyagi and talking
Yeah.
about that mentor role. We can
Yeah.
have very kind, loving, gracious parents at moments in our lives, and they can be the opposite in our life, right? But
Mm-hmm.
but at some point we need that mentor type role. And I feel like
God,
grandparents
Sage.
can fit that pretty easily
They
because you're
really can.
separated, right? there's
Yeah.
there's blessings and benefits that come from that separation
Yeah.
to where
Where
you
you're not
you
responsible
can
for every
engage.
single
Yeah.
interaction and you don't
Yeah.
have to have the resentment of every single time. Because you don't have to really,
Yeah.
if I suppose if it's done right, you don't really have to say no, right?
And
You
they're
can
not
just
new
kind of,
parents either, right?
no,
They've
you
learned
totally,
quite a bit. Like
yeah.
when you have kids, you're a new parent, or when you take on the role of being, responsible for someone or looking over someone, whether they're your child or not, it it's a learning process. You're just as
It's
new at
so
as it
funny
new at
too.
it as a
It
kid would be new at life.
it's so funny. It's so funny how many things I thought my parents, well, didn't know. You know what I mean? But like as I'm headed into grandparenthood, like my son's about going to be getting married in
Mm-hmm.
the next 6 months or whatever. So I could be a grandparent in another year or so, which is kind of funny. Like, yeah, dude. I mean, well, it's totally evident. See, like we still
Yeah.
have a 6-year old.
Mm-hmm.
And oh my gosh, dude, the way that we raise our 6-year-old compared to how we raised the other ones. And we're doing some things better. And there are some things we're not quite doing as good, honestly.
Sure.
I have to be honest. It's just hard, because like, it's or 40 when I got a 6 year
Yeah.
old, you know, when instead of being 20 and having, or, you know, yeah, late 20s and having a 6 year old, it's different.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's something that grandparents can bring to the mix, dude. I'm gonna murder the grandparent role, dude. I'm gonna grand slam that bad boy. It's gonna be
Yeah.
so
I'd like
fun.
to. I'm excited for that eventually.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, man. Well, great show, great. I
It
wanted
was. It was a fun one.
before we hold on, keep us going for another minute. I want to give a shout out to the person
No,
that
I
prompted
enjoyed it.
this.
It was a fun one that had lighthearted moments, a lot of emotional
Dude,
some shocking moments, but it
be
was
prepared to
good.
be
I
punched
wasn't
in the gut.
I wasn't sure what to expect, but then when I saw Peter Falk and DB Sweeney and Julianne Moore and I still can't remember the other guy's name. He just has a real smart short role. I thought, well, it's got to be at least interesting. It has Columbo in it,
Yeah.
so I was like, there's got
Yeah,
to be
he's
something
such
there,
a
and it was
brilliant
good. It
actor.
was fun.
Besides being distracted by his bad
I
makeup.
think the person who posted, I think, said it was maybe his mother's favorite movie, or someone close to him favorite movie.
Yes, that's
And
right. Templar Ace was the person on YouTube that asked us
requested.
to do this movie, and he said, "Yeah, it was one of my mom's favorite movies, and she just passed."
Yeah.
So I think that was one of the reasons why they brought it up. So
Well,
Templar Ace,
hopefully you
hopefully
find
some of the
something
things that we
helpful,
talked
my
about,
friend.
integrate, allow yourself to feel what you're feeling, and yeah, keep
And
moving
thanks
on.
for the
That's it.
movie
Yeah, thanks for
recommendation.
the
It was
suggestion. It was a
fun.
great film to watch. Really appreciate it.
All right. Adios, my friends.